Okay, so when you hear the word pirate, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Is it some swashbuckling hero on a grand adventure? Maybe a villain with a parrot on his shoulder, obsessed with buried treasure? Well, the truth is, as it often is, way more complicated and honestly a lot more fascinating. So let's dive into the true story of what we call the Golden Age of Piracy. Our goal here is to basically strip away all that Hollywood fantasy. We're going to get into the gritty, desperate, and surprisingly short-lived reality of the historical pirate. We're separating fact from fiction to see what was really going on out there on the high seas. All right, let's just get this out of the way first. Forget the treasure maps, forget walking the plank. That almost never happened. The reality for most sailors who turned to piracy was a desperate escape. They were fleeing, massive unemployment back on land and just horrifyingly brutal conditions on merchant and naval ships. And for most of them, this choice led to the same exact destination: a very, very short and incredibly violent career.
Now, when historians talk about this Golden Age, they're pointing to a pretty specific window of time, about 80 years, give or take, from the mid-1600s to the early 1700s. This was the moment when piracy just exploded, becoming this major force across the world's most critical shipping lanes, from the Caribbean all the way to the Indian Ocean.
But why then, right? What made this specific period so special? This wasn't just a few rogue sailors deciding to go bad. It was, and this is the key, a perfect storm of political, economic, and social factors that created this unprecedented opportunity for piracy to thrive on a massive global scale. You can almost think of it like a recipe. Seriously, step one, you take the end of these huge European conflicts, like the War of the Spanish Succession. Step two, that dumps tens of thousands of trained, battle-hardened, but now totally unemployed military sailors onto the streets. Step three, you mix that in with a huge boom in valuable transatlantic trade, which creates endless targets. And for the final ingredient, the garnish, you add a few corrupt colonial governors who are more than happy to look the other way or even fund pirates for a nice cut of the loot. And the engine that was driving this whole thing, it was a triangular trade. You had ships just overflowing with valuable goods, sugar, tobacco, cocoa, and horrifically, enslaved people, constantly sailing between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. For a pirate crew, these routes were like an all-you-can-eat buffet. And to really get why someone would choose this life, you have to understand the alternative. Life on a standard merchant ship was just appalling. We're talking starvation, rampant disease, discipline that was just pure brutality. It was so bad that mortality rates were shockingly high. As this quote says, sometimes they were even higher than on the slave ships themselves. So for a lot of sailors, the freer life of a pirate wasn't just an attractive option, it probably seemed like the only option for survival. Now, it's important to remember that this whole Golden Age wasn't just one long, continuous event. Historians actually break it down into three pretty distinct waves. Each one had its own unique character, its own key players, and its own favorite hunting grounds. Let's take a look at how this all unfolded.
So first up was the buccaneering period. These were mostly privateers, basically state-sanctioned pirates, who were based in places like Jamaica and Tortuga, mostly attacking Spanish ships and colonies. Then, things shifted to the pirate round. This is when captains started making these incredibly long voyages from the Americas all the way to the Indian Ocean for much richer prizes. And finally, you get the phase we all think of, the post-Spanish succession period. This is when that flood of jobless sailors created the legendary Republic of Pirates in Nassau, in the Bahamas. And it was this third and final wave that really burned the brightest and the fastest. This is the period that created the legends, right? The household names whose reputations have somehow managed to echo for centuries. We're talking about people like Edward Blackbeard Teach, who was a master of psychological warfare. He used fear as his main weapon before he was finally killed in a bloody battle. Or Black Sam Bellamy, who kind of saw himself as a Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich before his ship went down in a massive storm. And of course, you have to mention fearsome female pirates like Anne Bonny, who more than held her own in a man's world before she just vanishes from the historical record. But, a wild republic like this couldn't last forever. The threat to global trade just became too big for the European empires to ignore any longer. So the big question is, how did this powerful, sprawling network of pirates collapse so darn quickly? So what was it? What finally brought the curtain down on the Golden Age? Well, it wasn't just one single event. It was a concerted, coordinated, and absolutely ruthless campaign by the very empires the pirates had been plundering. The British Empire, in particular, struck back with a classic carrot-and-stick approach.
They sent officials like Governor Woody's Rogers to go clean up pirate havens like Nassau. That was the stick. The carrot was offering royal pardons to any pirate who would surrender. But for those who refused, they were hunted down relentlessly by the Royal Navy. And in this brilliant, kinda twisted move, they even hired former pirates to become pirate hunters, turning them against their old comrades. The hunters literally became the hunted.
Now here's the part that is truly shocking when you think about it. For all of its impact on our culture, the absolute peak of piracy, the era of Blackbeard, Bellamy, Calico Jack, all the big names, was incredibly brief. It lasted only about 8 years. The true golden age wasn't even a golden decade. It was just a flash in the pan.
So, if the actual era was so short and so brutal, why are we still so obsessed with it? How on earth do these desperate, often vicious criminals get transformed into the romantic, swashbuckling heroes we see in the movies today?
Well, the answer is that the myth-making machine kicked into high gear almost the second the Golden Age was over. The popular image that we all have in our heads today isn't really history at all. It's storytelling, pure and simple.
Now what's amazing is that much of what we think we know about pirates can be traced back to a single source, a book from 1724 called A General History of the Pirates. It was filled with these sensationalized, often completely made-up biographies, and it became an instant bestseller. This one book basically cemented all the pirate archetypes we still see today, and it went on to directly influence everything from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to pretty much every modern pirate blockbuster.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? We know the reality was a brief, violent, and desperate chapter of maritime history. So why? Why does the romantic legend of the free-spirited, rebellious pirate continue to capture our imaginations so powerfully hundreds of years later?